So while we're still in like a meditative mode, let's do a brief contemplation of gratitude or appreciation for the kindness of others. This is our theme for today. We'll contemplate it in various ways today, but let's start with a simple way, just in the present, right now. So ordinarily, it's not what we focus on. But actually, right, we just contemplate. So the seat I'm sitting on, I didn't make it. It didn't come about causelessly. It didn't come from nowhere. 100% clear, right? It came through the hard work of others. People who designed it, people who made it, people who shipped it, people who bought it, people who brought it here, and so forth. Actually, just the seed alone, right? The people who created different parts of the materials, grew them or mined them. Actually, just this seed came about through the kindness of so many other people. If it weren't for their efforts, it wouldn't be here. And then the rug the seed is on, just as clear, right? It came about through the kindness of so many people. That this building exists, right, to sit in. Actually, it's very difficult even to imagine, right, how many people its existence depends on. Right? And to have the electricity here, to have air conditioning, to have lights. So ordinarily, I don't even think about that, right? I just use things without noticing that they come about, that they're available through a process of interdependence, of interconnectedness, and of the efforts, hard work, hardships, and kindness of others. So on a hot day like today, right? With the presence of electricity, of air conditioning. We don't produce our own electricity. We didn't make the air conditioner from scratch. It totally came about through the kindness of others. My ability to relate to others. Right, that is our ability to relate. We know this, right, as human beings. Right, when we're born, actually we're totally dependent. As we grow up, right, for so many years, we're totally dependent, 100%, like, dependent on others. If others don't give us attention, right, actually we would have like failure to thrive. We actually wouldn't grow up. They have to give us food or we would die, but also they have to give us like attention and affection or our brains wouldn't develop properly. So just the fact that I'm here and understand means somebody was very kind to me. Not just one person, but usually quite a few people. The fact that I can sustain attention, that I can relate to others, that I can speak, that I can understand language, that I can sit, move, that I can read or write, that I can drive, that I can relate, that I can sustain myself. All of that, every single thing I can do came about through the kindness of others. Everything I know came about through, kindness of others. So we really try to develop a sense of gratitude, of appreciation for the inconceivable. Whereas ordinarily we don't think this way, but now we try to contemplate this like kind of almost unimaginable like network of dependence and of relatedness that we're part of. How we're the recipients of so much work and so much kindness and so much effort. And in each moment, actually, of our enjoyment, our comfort, is because of the hard work of others. So really try and develop a feeling or an understanding, inner understanding, that has a quality of gratitude. Of a kind of humble appreciation. When you think of the thousands or millions of others that you're dependent upon for everything, that they do, right, so that you're able to live. So I'll say a few things about today's topic that relates to what we just meditated on, but it's much more extensive, and then we'll have some discussion about it. Because I think it's a say not an easy topic in some ways. So we've gotten up to we meditated on equanimity so far, and then had a general understanding of what bodhicitta is. So now we're really getting into the methods for cultivating bodhicitta. And so we're going to start with. We're actually going to cover it in the way Lama Tsongkhapa teaches this method, which is integrating. There are two traditions of how to generate bodhicitta. One is called the 7-point cause and effect method. There are only two ways to develop bodhicitta, and there's through meditation and contemplation. One is the 7-point cause and effect method, which is the one we're going to start on, which includes. Which is the one where Tibetans have this term mother beings, mother sentient beings, right? So it starts with seeing all beings as one's mother, recollecting the kindness of the mother, wishing to repay that kindness, and then love, compassion, the unusual attitude of universal altruism, and then bodhicitta. The other method is equalizing and exchanging self for others. That's the method that Tonglen comes from, which has... which is actually they say that method is for those of higher intelligence, or more merit is maybe a better way to put it. But and that one involves first equalizing self and others, through its kind of unique Mahayana equanimity, and then seeing the faults of self-centeredness, seeing the advantages of cherishing others or of love, and then actually exchanging self for others. So it's cherishing others more than one cherishes oneself. And then Tonglen, taking and giving, and then bodhicitta. So Lama Tsongkhapa combines those two into one, which is a very effective method. So there's I guess so. Even those of us who aren't so sharp, we can still benefit from the unique methods of equalizing, exchanging self for others. So he was very kind for those of us who aren't. But if you're extremely sharp, you can skip over some parts. But for most of us, we can combine them. But his method of integrating those two still starts the same. It starts with equanimity and then the beginning of the 7-point method. And so I want to talk a little bit about this idea of viewing all beings or recognizing all beings as one's mother, and then recollecting the kindness. And so I want to start with just saying, part of what's implied, or it's not said explicitly, but it's implied in this meditation, or this whole, all the meditations actually on Bodhichitta, is that ordinary people, right, first of all, are self-centered, or is much of the time. So we're trapped, in other words, in a kind of self-centered attitude that fails to recognize our interrelatedness with others, our dependency on others, like what we were just contemplating, right? So ordinarily when you put on a shirt, do you think about where it came from? Ordinarily if you eat something, do you think about where it came from, right? Do you think about the kindness of others? And there's this recognition that ordinarily, we just sort of almost like naively do what we're doing without contemplating our interdependence and interrelatedness with others. And what Buddhism is asserting, actually, scriptures of the Buddha, right? People said, they say the Buddha was omniscient, right? He could see everything that existed, and then somebody would say to him, well, when was the beginning of samsara? And he said, I can't see any beginning because it doesn't exist. Whereas even the Buddha couldn't see something that doesn't exist, and there was no beginning. So this idea is that you're like this moment of mental awareness right now, right? Arose from a previous moment, and that's an endless or infinite continuum. Again, this is why I say this is a little bit of a difficult topic. It's like, we covered this in the first module, but it's a little hard to get your mind around sometimes. I think it can. Right? Even just to think, well, who was I in my last? Like if somebody says, oh, well, I believe in reincarnation. Who was I in my last life? Right? Like we don't ordinarily think it's infinite, though. Right? It's actually disturbing, I think, if you start to think that way. Like, so my continuum of existence was infinite, and also will be infinite. Actually, that's the Buddhist view, right? Is that consciousness, Nagarjuna says, samsara has a cause. Actually, it's very much dependent arising, right? Nagarjuna says samsara has a cause, which is ignorance. So if you get rid of ignorance, you destroy the cause of samsara, and suffering can end, right? Because suffering has a cause. If you destroy the cause of suffering, suffering can end. Nagarjuna says, but consciousness just arises from the previous moment of consciousness. So there's not a cause to get rid of. And so Nagarjuna says consciousness will never, even when you become a Buddha, there will still be some kind of awareness. So the Nagarjuna says, in a sense, the continuum of consciousness is beginningless and endless. Can you imagine that? Just that alone is hard to imagine, right? So that in a sense, to say you're an infinite being maybe is a little weird because it's not you exactly, but in a sense you could say that. You're an infinite being, right, who has no beginning and no end. And then the Buddhist view is so you've been infinitely interconnected with others. Right? So like that since beginningless time, right, or since infinite time, you've been interrelated with others. And then it becomes almost heartbreaking. If you think, well, okay, so just my shirt and my shoes and my car and my tissue and my toilet paper and my everything comes from others in this life, but that's been true infinitely, right? That I've infinitely been dependent upon others, and that others have been infinitely related to me. So this is still the beginning, this is the preface of just to get our mind around what Buddhism's saying. Because actually, in the West, nobody walks around thinking that, right? Nobody walks around thinking I'm infinitely interconnected with others, and that I'm infinite, and that others have been infinitely kind to me, is the implication. And then Buddhism says, now this is the idea, now we're getting at this idea, in order to develop bodhicitta, one has to have a sense of intimacy with others and also of appreciation. So then Buddhism says, right, so for a human being in a human body, the most intimate well, so if I've had infinite lives, right, then each life I had a mother. That's the idea. That's the idea of this contemplation. Right, and so in an infinite number of times, people were kind to me that way. And then what Buddhism would assert, and this is actually the context, right, is that my mother of this life was my mother previous. Right, if I had an infinite number, then my mother of this life was also my mother in other lives. Was kind to me, and over and over again, infinitely. And then Paul was also my mother, an infinite number of times, right, and raised me. And Jen was my mother, infinite number of times. And everybody I come across, because we're infinite, right, and they were infinite, now we're infinitely related. So they were my brother, they were my sister, they were my mom, they were my dad. And then what Buddhism says is, for the purposes of developing bodhicitta, one is cultivating the sense of what? Of intimacy and of gratitude to others, right? That's a basis for developing love. And so what Buddhism is saying is, so contemplate, actually, right, your infinite interconnectedness with others, and then contemplate your infinite dependence on others, and then particularly contemplate how all sentient beings, all creatures, have been your mother in the sense of being kind to you, carrying you, raising you, an infinite number of times. That's actually the contemplation. So there's two steps in this. The first two steps. One is recognizing all beings as mothers, and the second is contemplating the infinite kindness of them. Again, I did all the introduction because that, actually, if you really think about it from our cultural point of view, that's totally bizarre. Right? That view. From Buddhist perspective, it's not bizarre at all. Although, I'll say this too, Rinpoche Rinpoche points out that when his teacher, Pabonka Rinpoche, his root teacher, Pabonka Rinpoche, that when he was going to do this contemplation, he had to stay in retreat just on this one point, right? These 2 points, recognizing all beings as the mother and contemplating the kindness. That it took him a long time in retreat to actually gain the experience of that. Because the recognition is that, one is we have cultural obstacles to that, but then even for somebody who doesn't have any cultural obstacles, it's not easy to view everybody that way. And to feel, because the idea then, right, this is the goal, now I want to give a sense of what the purpose of this is, right? That, actually, I'll say it this way, the idea, if you do this, right, just those first 2 points is not yet bodhicitta. We're not anywhere near having realized bodhicitta yet. But if you just realize these 2 points, right, then everyone you meet, right, you'll feel a sense of extreme intimacy and appreciation and affection for them, right? Or is that, if you just realize these 2 points, then you develop that automatically, right? Which means you see an insect and you feel an extreme affection. Right? You meet a stranger and you feel extreme affection. You meet whatever animal, whatever human being, right? You immediately feel this sense of intimacy and affection with them because that's your view of them, right? Is that they're kind. Our view of them is they're in my way, maybe, or something, right? That's our ordinary, either they're in my way or what are they going to give me, or, whereas if you're a self-centered being, right? If you exist as a non-bodhisattva, right? Then you're relating to others in terms of what are they doing for or against me. Right? That's what we did earlier. Remember last time? Friend, enemy, stranger, right? If they're not doing anything to me, then I don't care about them. If they're hurting me, then I don't like them. if I'm thinking of gratitude, then I would think of what he's taught me, and I would feel like, wow, it's so helpful. Like in other words, I would be totally lost if I hadn't learned that from him. It was so kind to me. So there's two different states of mind. One thing I'll say, actually, I wrote about that in one book, but also grateful. I want to say something about that, just because I think, again, these are not like traditional Tibetan. This part is not traditional, but I'll just say it. Because actually, the word grateful, though, implies something, actually, which is actually even the word itself, right? Gratitude or grateful implies feeling full, right, of something positive, of greatness, of what's great. And that's like, it's also an antidote to burnout, actually. Whereas if we try to practice bodhicitta, right, without first feeling ourselves the recipient of infinite kindness, actually then we become like many, if you look at many Westerners, many of us, we do this, right, where you sort of try to, we want to practice compassion, or you want to practice something good, and so you go out and you try to do stuff, right, and then you start to get tired, and then you start to get like burnt out or something, or stressed out, or, and actually it's because we don't have enough gratitude, right? Like, in other words, so we're sort of pushing ourselves to do something. Whereas if you cultivate gratitude first, then the actions come naturally and sort of aren't, what's the word? It doesn't have the same feeling, actually. In other words, it doesn't have that feeling of depletion. That's the word. Because gratitude is the opposite of feeling depleted, actually. If you feel grateful, like if you really contemplate, wow, this person is so kind to me, that actually you start to feel very full, almost overflowing. That's the inner emotional experience, is the sense of fullness to where you can almost overflow, right? Which is then naturally this wish to repay others kindness comes. You see what I'm saying? Like that's why there's a psychological sequence there. Recognizing the kindness, recognizing others' kindness leads to wanting to repay that kindness. But it's not a push then. Where sometimes people try to push too fast to, I should repay the kindness of others, I have to repay their kindness. And actually that becomes more like a sense of duty or something, or like a sense of, I should repay their. And that's not what Buddhism is getting at. What Buddhist psychology is really getting at is stay longer on the gratitude part, or the appreciation, until you feel so full, like, that you can't bear not to repay their kind. You know what I mean? Like, it's this feeling of like, it would be so uncomfortable not to. Like, if somebody were trying, like, it's not like I should. It's like, if somebody were to try to stop me, it would be so uncomfortable because I have to repay that kind. It's like, because you feel so much love and affection. Does that make sense? Like, so it was when you do something, and I want to say this too, because you can tell, right? If somebody does something out of sense of duty, it's not that that's bad, right? But they get tired after a while, right? Whereas when you're doing something out of a sense of gratitude and love and affection, actually you don't get tired of that because it's fun. Like I was totally, I couldn't, and then when I was sick, like I didn't know what was going on, right? Like and all I could do, like I didn't even understand sick. I must have just felt some sense of discomfort or pain, right? And then this person was like worried about me and like would drive anywhere, would do anything, would take me any place to try to figure out a solution to my sickness, right? Like, until I felt better, right? And they found it unbearable that I was sick, actually, right? Like they couldn't rest because I was sick. Like, and it's strange, actually, right? Like, and you can almost feel, why in the world would they do that, actually? Like, whereas they didn't, like, I had nothing to offer back except piss, or something. Like, there was like, what did I have to offer? I was helpless, actually, right? But they did that over and over, and every night they got up, right? And every day, right? And they gave up their own resources, right? Like the food off their plate, but also like money that they could have used to do other things, they spent on me. Right? And other resources they spent on me, right? Over and over again, actually, right? And like if they would endanger themselves. If I was in danger, right? For sure, when I was a little kid, like going out in the street or, like they would put themselves in danger, right? To keep me from getting run over or hurt or something, right? If some stranger was coming towards me, right? They would run right in front, right? Like without a doubt, they would go right in front of me towards the stranger who was dangerous. When I was a toddler and just barely walking, right? Where they could have gotten killed or something. Like in one way, it's insane, actually, right? But they did that over and over again, right? So you first contemplate your own mother, right? And then you start to go into past lives. And you say, okay, and she didn't do that for me just once, but she did that to me in past lives, over and over. And actually, just your own mother, actually, if you think about, or parent, again, if it's not your biological mother, whoever took care of you, like, I mean, she did that actually not just when you were an infant, right? But somebody did that for you for a long time. When you were 7 or 8, you weren't suddenly graduated and off on your own, right? So there were years and years where people took care of me, right? And then they did that in past lives. And they did it over and over until you get this sense of, so you think of one person, right? You think of your mother, then you think of your father, then you think of your grandparents, and you think all of them did that infinitely. And if you do that enough, you start to get this feeling of like, wow, like I could never repay that much kindness. Like that's the feeling that should arise, is like it would be impossible to repay that much. If they did that just in this life, I could never repay it. But if they did that over in past lives also, over and over again, then it would feel like it's impossible to ever repay that kind. Like it's such a gift, and it was given with love, right? The reason, in other words, when you feel like, why in the world did they get up in the morning? Well, they loved me, right? Why did they give me the food off their plate? They loved me. Why did they put themselves in danger? Because they loved me, right? Whereas that was why they did it at that time. They had some sense of appreciation for me, of like adoration or something, right? And then they did that in past lives over and over, like, and they got nothing out. Actually, and then if you think about it from a Buddhist point of view, many times they even did negative things for me, right? They didn't have, in other words, because they didn't understand, like karma. Actually, they hurt others, right? Somebody harmed me and they hit them. Somebody threatened me and they threatened them. Maybe they stole, if not in this life, in past lives for sure. People stole. Parents steal for their kids. Parents lie for their kids. And that not only were they kind to me, but they actually created the causes of their own suffering in order to do that for me. Until you feel it's totally unbearable, and then you expand that out and you think, and everybody did, then you get to and Paul did that, and Jen did that, and this other, everybody did that. Does that make sense? At least I'm just giving the sense of what you actually meditate on. Let's stop there and see if people have comments or questions. in a way, is a good thing because it's true. In other words, that's accurate in a way. In other words, if you develop that sense of infinite kindness from others, there is the recognition, wow, I really can't do much, is actually true. In other words, until I become, that's part of what gives rise to bodhicitta, is that recognition of, I've got to become enlightened in order to, because that's why it's bodhicitta. There was one, of course, one first cultivates love and compassion and so on, but that's actually that mind that says, I can't repay it. In other words, like others have been so kind to me and I can't repay it, really, is actually what gives rise to what gives rise to the recognition, therefore I must achieve enlightenment. Because only an enlightened being could
not screw it up.
It could actually make a difference. There was especially with an infinite number. In other words, how do you help an infinite number of beings? You have to become enlightened. In other words, that's actually, that recognition is what ultimately gives rise to bodhicitta. Is the recognition I can't, until I become enlightened, I can't repay it.
Carry on.
Yeah, so that's actually a good recognition.
Yeah, sooner rather than later.
Well, then that gives rise to special bodhicitta.
Okay.
So how does the doctors know it? Is it like the doctors? Do they have like that? Doctors, do they have compassion like that? What kind of compassion do the doctors in hospital have?
Depends on the doctor. Some have none. Actually, I've talked to doctors where they say that they're taught. Many doctors say in medical school they're taught not to feel too much compassion. That they're supposed to just think objectively. So it depends on the doctor in that sense. Some do, but some don't. But I want to comment a little bit on your question for a minute, because I think it's very common. So I just think, and you addressed it also. It's such a common issue in the West. And I'll say this too. I mean, for some, sometimes it can be, for some people, it's easier to start off, thinking. That's why I think for some people it's better almost start with a preliminary of just thinking about the kindness of the, like the kindness in this life of the other things, like starting with some things that are obvious, like, for example, teachers and grandparents and whoever,
It's
cousins.
a lot easier to
and
develop
uncles.
Compassion for people I have no relationship with, like, you don't know at all, and that just seems so bizarre.
But then, so I think that's good. In other words, I think oftentimes it's useful to start that way, and that's why sometimes from the other method of generating bodhicitta, you actually think about, you can think about there are 3 times: present kindness, which is what we started to do, right? This thing of all my happiness in this life comes from others, all my resources, all the food and clothing and all that, and then also you think of future, right? Like, whereas to become a Buddha, it totally requires the kindness of others, right? Teachers, but also. We said last time, right? You need somebody to be difficult to you, so you can practice patience. You need somebody who is in need, so you can practice generosity. You need somebody to tempt you to do bad things, so you can practice ethics. If you have if there's nobody around you to ever do anything unethical, then you won't learn about unethics and you won't be able to train in ethics. So you need others to. So I mean, one way to do it is you can start actually. In a way, it's like starting with the and again, I mean, I see this in therapy all the time, so I'm just trying to differentiate. In the West, we talk about that, and it's a valid consideration from our cultural perspective. Like many people say, my parents didn't understand me, they weren't empathic, they had narcissistic needs in relation to me, and that's all from our cultural point of view. That's true, and I'm not denying that. What Buddhism is saying is that's not relevant to this. It was like what Buddhism is saying is, if you want to discuss that in your culture, fine. But what Buddhism's talking about is, is a much more like almost animal level of need and more basic level of need. So like it's not denying whereas Buddhism isn't saying your culture's wrong and that's not true. Whereas if somebody so like for example, if if your parent wasn't good with empathy and didn't understand you or that kind of thing, it's not talking about that. It's not saying that's wrong or right. Nobody's like Buddhism isn't addressing that. It's a different question almost.
So you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah, what Buddhism's saying is like what the Buddhist training, if you read the actual teachings, are saying is like, when you were more helpless than a bug, did somebody hold you close? And if a wild dog or a strange man suddenly came over to you, did somebody walk over and pick you up and carry you away and hold you, and say, I'll stay away from strangers, and teach you like these basic things of survival, don't walk near the cliff, don't go into traffic, like these like survival things that are like totally necessary, and like, and did they get up in the middle of the night to clean you and so on? Did they, and when they wanted to, when they wished they could do their own thing, did they still do that? And when they might have wanted to go, when they were, when you were in their womb and they might have wanted to go out. And also when you think about, this is implied in the Buddhist things, right? Is that, and I'm not getting into the psychology, I'm just saying the simple, is that when people become first parents, they're still very young, right? Like, and like, so they might have wanted to go out partying, right? But they didn't smoke and drink as much or something, because they realized, wow, if I get really drunk, it's probably not good for my kid or something. Like, they're talking about that level of like,
some sort of awareness.
Awareness and like, and sacrifice, because it is sacrifice. It was getting up in the middle of the night is a sacrifice by any measure, right? And like, and not relaxing and not, like you look at any parents actually. Even, again, like good enough parents. I'm talking about like, by good enough, it means like, that they're doing the basics, right? Like, you watch them and like, they're so damn tired, right? Like they're getting up early, they're staying up late, they're, like, and they change their whole, like, whether they're great parents or mediocre parents, like, they do change their entire routines, right? Like, to accommodate the needs of the child's schedule and all that. And so I just want to point out, so Buddhism is talking about a very basic sort of level of good enough parenting, and that's a different consideration from the psychological dynamics in a family systems or something like that. So does that make sense at least? That it's two different, just to address, I want to address that question because I really do think it's two different considerations that are being addressed. And when you think about the infinite kindness over infinite lifetimes, even that, Buddhism isn't saying, actually, there's no Buddhist text. It's interesting. If you look at what they mean by that, like if you study at least I've never seen one. I've read a lot about this topic. I've never yet seen one that said, they tried. Like they did whatever they could do. In that. So yeah, you go all the way up. And actually, one thing I'll say too is I'm skipping ahead now. But then there's I thought it was interesting. The Panchen Lama in Easy Path, he says then that after contemplating that, and so on, that when you're trying to develop love, actually, because you go through after thinking of the kindness and gratitude, and then the wish to repay the kindness, then you cultivate love, and then compassion. And what he says is you go back actually. He says when you're starting to cultivate love and compassion, go back to your mother of this life. And he's interesting. He says psychologically, he says I guess it was his experience. He says think of her when she's very extremely, what's the word, like either I guess elderly or sick or something like that, where she's kind of helpless. And he said that's just the beginning point. In other words, you can do other contemplations eventually. But he said actually for an emotional, just to try to get the right feeling, he's saying that's an easy way to access it is to think of a time when to imagine even if your mom is young and healthy at the time when you're doing it, to imagine someday in the future her near the end of her life and being elderly and being sick and being vulnerable, and if you've contemplated her kindness when you were in need and a baby and then on from there, that if you then bring to mind the end of her life, it's easier to develop that feeling of wow. And then if she's vulnerable, the feeling that it would arise if you've done the first part well is, wow, if she's vulnerable and sick or dying or something, like the feeling that arises, well, I couldn't just say, well, I don't care. Like in other words, it would feel unbearable to say, who cares? The feeling that would arise is I have to somehow, and that feeling of connectedness is part of what it's getting at.
Yeah, because that's the part that makes it transformative. It goes around full circle. Yeah.
Because we're getting to repaying all this is leading towards the feeling of wanting to repay the kindness. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't do much. Otherwise, it's not. It doesn't really. Yeah. That's what makes it transformative. Exactly. Is you have to keep going. So I'm just emphasizing this point today. But yeah, you have to get to those. Do other people? It seemed like. Did you have something to comment?
I just have to say that my son just texted me and said that he loved me.
Ah, that's great.
Isn't that funny?
That's amazing.
Yes, well.
Wow.
Just
fall out of my chair.
Maybe he
Intuited somehow. That's great. Wow. Well, he was appreciating the
I
same
don't
point,
know.
I imagine. Yeah. He was appreciating your kindness.
I just thought it was neat.
Wow. But isn't it true? This point about the sacrifice. Your comment makes me think so. Like, I'll be honest. I've never yet met any parent who thought they were perfect as a parent. I've never met anybody who's a parent, who's a parent of somebody who's grown up a little bit.
have close cousins, you have one kind of relationship. If you have distant cousins, you have different kind of relationship. So I think that this comes from the intimacy that is built by sharing the value of the culture of the family, by spending time together and seeing the kinship and saying, oh, okay, there's a closer relationship, we love each other. It's kind of also the sense of, the tribe, the protection.
But if you don't have that,
But if
don't
you
get it.
don't have that, that's probably.
And then people,
different.
and I think if you don't have that, you tend to still, like if you look at human history, people develop that then with either their country or their region or their, whereas there's sports teams even. I mean, I sometimes think, wow, people, like you look at people about, like around here about the Redskins, I think.
don't have that either.
I don't either, but I'm just saying, like, or I don't either, but I'm saying, like, people identify with something usually, and I guess my point was not about that really, it was indirect, but my main point is this, is like, this contemplation is really to develop that kind of feeling towards everybody, is the point, and it's developed this sense of, essentially, think about the word familiarity, right? I mean, the root of that word is family, right? Like, so some sense of every, and again, I can't help but think of the Dalai Lama who goes around saying brothers and sisters, and it's really this sense, I mean, that part of the goal of this meditation, one is gratitude, right? But the other is this sense of relating to everybody as if they're your, like, as if they're familiar, as if they're your mom, actually, and I'll say for me, actually, I'm sharing my own, my own contemplation with this. I remember sometimes when I was a little kid, I would go down to see my grandparents often, in Florida they lived. And I remember the feeling as I got off the plane, right? Back then you didn't have, they could come to the gate. Now you're not allowed to do that, right? Are you guys, you're old enough to remember when they I'm not sure. But there was a time when people would come to the gate, right? And I remember this feeling, I would get off the plane, and when they would see me, right? My grandmother would see me, and this look would come, like, oh, and she'd like immediately wanted to hug me, And like, I think of that feeling of like connectedness and of warmth between us and my grandfather. I think of both of them there, and I think, wow, like I remember that for me, that's when I'm contemplating. I think of that feeling I had when I would see their face when they would light up, that they were so happy to see me because they loved me, right? And then I think, wow, so that's the. Of course, you don't act like that because that'd be crazy, but that's the feeling that comes when you meet anybody, right? If you're a bodhisattva, right? Like somebody comes along, and that's the goal of this meditation, right? If you've meditated on them as your most cherished, most kind, most intimate relation, right? Then there's this feeling of like so happy to be with them. And then do you see how, like what I was getting at earlier, then the feeling that arises, like, if there's something to do for that person, it's not like a burden, right? But it's this feeling like what you were describing, I can't do enough, actually, right? Like, whereas then that's the goal, actually, is like what you were saying, like, we both said it in different ways, right? You said it in relation to your own kids, and you said it in theory about if you're cultivating bodhicitta, right?
Yeah, actually, the first time I ever felt like that was with my kids.
Yeah, so you know what I mean? And the feeling is like that. In other words, it's like, so then you can see how, like, this is why, I think, this is my own editorializing or something. I think that's why bodhisattvas don't get burned out, or this is part of it, there's also their wisdom. But this is part of why bodhisattvas don't get burned out in their work for others, is that, like, they feel like that, right? Like, they feel so, like, happy to do stuff for others because they are in love with, because they're madly in love with everybody, right? And so then they're so happy to do things for others. And then if they, and their suffering is that, in a way, is that they can't do enough, which is why they're trying to become enlightened, right? And that's why they make so much effort to become a Buddha, is that, like, they're like, well, then I can more, each step of the way along the path, they can help others more, actually, right? You become, like Lama Yeshe said that, right? At each level of the path, there's that much more ability to be of service to others. And so they're trying to make progress as quickly as possible. And you look at, actually, like I was joking, you said, faster, and that's actually when you look at tantric, like the tantric motivation, right? It says actually that people don't become, people don't develop the kind. There is some people just practice tantra because it's like
Awesome.
cool or something. Oh wow, that's the highest. People say, oh, the highest one. So okay, I want to do the highest, which is not a proper motivation, right? But the real motivation, if you look at it, it's that they say that the person can't bear it. In other words, they can't So you first start off by contemplating, right? That this lifetime that I'm living right now was preceded by another life, which was preceded by another life. And if I contemplate, right, that I've had that my previous lives are beginningless or infinite, then that means, right, that if I were to bring to mind like a number, like I had 100 billion previous lives, that 100 billion doesn't even make a dent, right? There is in infinity, because there are an infinite number of 100 billions. So if I think I had 1 trillion past lives, then that doesn't even make a dent in beginninglessness, right? Because I've had an infinite number of trillions of past lives. Right, and the same would apply to 100 trillion or 1 billion trillions, right? Right? That I've had an infinite number of billion trillion past lives. That's what infinite means. And that this continuum, right, that this moment is beginningless, is infinite. And so therefore I've had an infinite number of mothers. So can you imagine that, right? So like, that if I just think I had 100,000 mothers, again, but I've had infinite numbers of hundreds of thousands, right? In there is or 1 million mothers. But that doesn't make any dent, because I've had an infinite number of millions. Actually, because it's infinite, right? Like, that means that like just the baby food or the breast milk that they not just once, but a countless number of times. My mother of this life was also my mother countless number of times. My father of this life was my mother countless number of times. My enemy was also my mother countless number of times. In those lives, like we felt we couldn't bear to be separated. Right, when I was young. Just like my mother of this life, like that, they worried about me, fretted when I was sick, did everything they could to take care of me. And they didn't just do that once, they did that over and over and over, lifetime after lifetime. Everyone in this room has been my mother a countless number of times since beginningless time. My most intimate helper and friend, carrying me in their body, caring for me throughout their life until the day of their death, doing their best to take care and look out for me. Even when they died, like wanting to leave behind something. And they did that over and over and over, lifetime after lifetime. All of my friends and family have been my mother countless times, each of them. All of my enemies, who now they look like inherently separate and other from me. They've all been my mother countless times. In those lives, they totally cherished me. I cherished them. I felt I couldn't be apart from them. Then I felt like we were inherently connected. Now I feel we're inherently disconnected. But they've been so kind to me, so many past times, endlessly, beginninglessly. And then also all the strangers in the world who I usually ignore, don't think about. I'm just not recognizing them. like with the baby's face pressed against the mother's skin, feeling that warmth, some kind of unique sensation, right? Of the baby's face pressing on the mother's belly or chest. Every sentient being was my mother. Every sentient being I laid on them like that. All the people in this room, all my, my mother, my father, all my friends, enemies, strangers. Right? With each and every one of them, not just once, but countless times, I was like that. I was small and helpless and couldn't sleep, and they held me to their body. And their gentle breathing worked like rocked me to sleep. And once I was asleep, right, even if they wanted to move, they didn't move, because they didn't want to wake me. And in those lives, right, I was a tiny creature. Right? Even if they wanted to move, they looked at my face with my eyes closed. Tiny and helpless, sleeping there on them. And even though my eyes were closed and I was asleep, right, you can imagine the look on their face. Right? Feeling like how precious I was, feeling a sense of love, like of happiness for my well-being and rest, concern for any discomfort for me, like the look of love they gave. And even somehow the love that almost would seem to have come from their skin itself. It helped me feel safe and soothed. All sentient beings, each being did that countless times with me. With that sense of intimacy, closeness, of affection, of love and of cherishing. Just one more contemplation. Same thing, right? Similar, like when I was in countless lives, right? When I was And we can just do our dedication. So through any positive merit, positive karma we created today, by cultivating Bodhichitta, first steps of cultivating Bodhichitta, by contemplating particularly gratitude and then the recognition of all beings as mothers and then appreciation of the kindness. So through that merit, may each of us here be able to realize the wish to repay that kindness, love, compassion, the exchange of self for others, the unique attitude of wishing to like personal responsibility, personal altruism to repay the kindness of infinite mothers. May we all realize bodhicitta and practice the bodhisattva path and succeed in becoming fully enlightened Buddhas in order to repay the kindness of each and every mother sentient being as vast as the vastness of space. Our supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not diminish, but increase.